You've probably seen the word Heyoka on social media. Posted in captions, claimed as identity, shared like a badge that finally explains everything, why you feel too much, why you don't belong, why the world has always seemed slightly backwards to you. And if you're honest, part of you wanted it to be true. Part of you wanted a name for the thing you carry. The problem is that what's being sold under that word has almost nothing to do with what it actually means. And the actual meaning is both harder and more precise. It asks something of you that the social media version never will. Today, we're going to look at what the Heyoka archetype actually is, drawn from its source, not from Pinterest, and what it means when this pattern runs through an INFJ. Because if this is genuinely your inheritance, you will know it by the end of this video. Not because it's flattering, because it's true. In Lakota tradition, the Heyoka is a sacred contrarian, someone who has received a vision of the thunder beings, Wakinyan, and is called from that moment to move through the world in reverse. They speak in opposites. They ride their horse facing backwards. They say cold when they mean hot. They cry at celebrations and laugh at funerals. They are by sacred obligation the ones who disrupt. And before you decide whether that's you, understand what disruption means here. It doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean being rude or provocative for its own sake. The Heyoka disrupts by perceiving something the group has stopped seeing. They are not being difficult. They are being surgically precise about a lie everyone else has agreed to accept. The Heyoka is the one who makes people uncomfortable, not because they are broken, but because they carry a mirror that shows things as they actually are, rather than as the group needs them to appear. And in Lakota cosmology, this figure is not marginal. They are necessary, sacred even, but also deeply lonely. The sacred contrarian does not get to put down the mirror and belong. That option was taken away the moment the Thunder Beings chose them. Carl Jung would recognize this pattern immediately. He called it the trickster, one of the core archetypes of the collective unconscious. Loki, Coyote, Hermes, Anansi. The figure who exists at the edge of every culture, who crosses every boundary the tribe has drawn, who simultaneously destroys and creates, disrupts and reveals. In every mythology that has ever been recorded, this archetype appears. Because the psyche needs it, every stable system, every culture, every family, every relationship eventually calcifies around its own unspoken agreements, around the things everyone has quietly decided not to name. The trickster is the force that breaks open calcified systems. The cost of carrying that force is that you rarely get to simply rest inside one. Here is where I want to name something that the social media version of this archetype will never tell you. The Heyoka wound is not the same as the gift. They are bound together, but they are not the same thing. The wound is this: you have probably spent your entire life being experienced as too much, too intense, too perceptive, too honest at the wrong moment. You have watched a group agree to a comfortable story and felt something in you refuse to agree with it, not out of stubbornness, not because you enjoy conflict, but because the lie was visible to you in a way it simply wasn't visible to anyone else in the room. You have learned this through consequences, through silence, through the particular experience of watching a group close ranks against the one who named the thing they needed not to name. Your perception is not always welcome. Let this breathe. You may have learned to silence it, to smile, agree, and carry the knowledge of what you saw in private. Or you may have kept speaking and paid the price over and over. Or, as is the most common pattern for INFJs carrying this archetype, you have done both at different times and with different people, and you are exhausted by the calculation. From always having to weigh, do I say what I see, or do I protect the relationship by staying quiet? This is the wound, not the perception itself. The perception is the gift. The wound is the cost of carrying it in a world that has not yet decided what to do with people who see through its agreements. For INFJs in particular, the Heyoka pattern has a specific expression that I want to name precisely. Because introverted intuition operates by perceiving patterns and processes rather than surface content, ENFJs with this archetype often experience a form of what I call empathic mirroring in reverse, where most people reflect what someone shows them, The INFJ Heyoka reflects back what someone is actually feeling beneath what they're showing. They see the grief inside the celebration, the fear inside the confidence, the longing inside the contempt, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they name it. And the room goes quiet, in exactly the way a room goes quiet when something true has just been said that nobody was ready to hear. Now, I want to name the shadow, because if you are carrying this archetype and you are not also carrying its shadow, you are not carrying it honestly. The trickster's shadow is this: the belief that disruption is always justified. That is because, since you can see clearly, you also have the right to unmask at will, that your perception gives you permission. It does not. The sacred Heyoka of the Lakota tradition was not someone who simply said whatever they perceived whenever it occurred to them. They were someone called to specific acts of sacred disruption at the right moment, in the right way, for the health of the whole. They were, in other words, disciplined. The gift was accompanied by a responsibility to know when the mirror was needed and when it would simply wound. The unintegrated trickster, the shadow expression of this archetype, mistakes every discomfort for truth-telling, mistakes provocation for revelation, uses the archetype's language to justify what, at its core, is a wound responding to a wound. If you find yourself drawn to disruption because it makes you feel powerful, rather than because something genuine needs to be named, that is shadow territory. If your clarity about others' hidden truths has become a way to keep people at a distance so they cannot see your own, that is shadow territory. If you have used this archetype as an identity rather than as a calling, that is shadow territory. These are not comfortable things to name. But this is what integration requires, not the comfortable version of the archetype, the real one. This is the elevation, oracular, compassionate, the recognition that the burden and the gift are inseparable, but that carrying them consciously changes everything. What does integration look like for the INFJ carrying this inheritance? The first step is this: naming the wound as a wound, not as proof that you are broken. The fact that your perception has cost you is not evidence that your perception is wrong. It is evidence that perception is inconvenient in a culture that rewards consensus. Those are very different things. The second step is learning the difference between what you see and what needs to be spoken. The Heyoka did not name everything. They named what needed to be named for the community's health. Your perception is not an obligation to speak. It is a responsibility to know when speaking serves the truth rather than just your own need to be witnessed. The third step, and this is the one most INFJs resist, is accepting the loneliness that is structural to this archetype without making it mean something it doesn't. You will not always be fully received in groups. You will not always be thanked for what you see. In fact, people will sometimes close ranks against you for it. This is not evidence that you are wrong. It is the ancient pattern playing itself out exactly as it always has. Cassandra was not wrong about Troy. She was simply carrying a perception that the city was not ready to face. The Heyoka was chosen by the thunder beings, not by themselves. Jung said the same thing about the trickster, that it was not an identity you adopted, but a pattern that operated through you, whether you cooperated with it or not. The question is not whether you carry this inheritance. The question is whether you carry it with consciousness or whether it carries you. Carrying it with consciousness means this: you see what you see, you do not apologize for seeing it, but you also know that the mirror is a sacred tool, not a weapon, not a performance, not a cage. You choose when to hold it up, and you hold it up for love, not to wound, not to prove, but because something true needs to be visible, and you are, apparently, the one who can see it. That is what the archetype asks of you, and it is not a small thing. But it is yours. It has always been yours. Heyoka archetype is not a personality type. It is not an excuse. It is not a brand. It is a calling to see clearly in a world that is often not ready to be seen. And if you are carrying it, if this has resonated somewhere beneath the level where things can be explained, then you have probably already known this about yourself for a long time. You know you cannot look away from what is real, even when doing so would make your life considerably easier. You know that your deepest belonging is not inside any group's comfortable story. You know that the gift and the wound are the same door. What changes with integration is not what you see. What changes is how you carry it. Which part of this names something you have been carrying in silence? Tell me in the comments. Your recognition matters, not just to you, but to the others watching who are still learning they are not alone in this. Subscribe if you want to keep moving through this territory. You are part of something here. Until next time, find your power, know your myth.